have most of the brake system mounted, emergency brake cables, brake lines. Used some aftermarket cables that came in handy. And I've got the piece run up to the cab, or to the inside of the car, to the emergency brake lever. But I got to cut it down once I set the body back down so I can measure exactly how long it needs to be. And I started on the fuel system. I've got all the clamp screw holes threaded, and I got the fuel filter mounted. I got some PTFE lines run, so I'm in the middle of doing that. So I'll get those run out up to the front. Then I can put the body back down to terminate them. So, and I ended up cutting the return line a little short so I could have a union, and then I'll have a couple of whips going up to the gas tank. So if you ever have to drop the tank, you don't have to get up underneath or get through the trunk. There's an excess hole in the trunk, but you can just undo. I'll put a couple of fittings on there and a coupling on the return line, and then the supply gets connected to the fuel filter anyway. And then if you ever had to drop the tank, you could just undo these two fittings and drop the whole thing without having to get in and try to take them off the fuel pump unit on top of the tank. So it's come along pretty good. Got the transmission cooler lines roughed in. I'm waiting for a couple of adapter fittings for the cooler. They're going to run along there. Fuel lines are all roughed in. It's tight, but if you take like a couple fittings off, you can get everything off pretty easily. So they're all run all the way back to the gas tank. So a little tying up there. Battery cables are run. I'm going to terminate those. I just got the terminal lugs for those. So there's the cables hanging down there. So I'm going to lift the body back off and then clamp all the, I just got all the clamps in the mail today. So I'll clamp those down and then keep moving. Making some progress on the plumbing. I got the AC lines roughed in. They're not crimped yet, but I wanted to get them run and see how they laid out. I'm waiting for a fitting for the suction line to go into the compressor and replace that with a 45 so it has a little bit better angle, gets it away from the exhaust. Looking at the heater hoses now. I need to get a 3-way valve instead of the 2-way valve that comes with it, because you want to keep the circulation in the motor. So when you turn the heater off, it doesn't shut the flow off completely. So you want that water to flow through the engine so it bypasses, even though it's not going through the heater core. I just got everything kind of loosely mocked up so I can line up the cooler lines for the transmission. I had to trim the fender wells a little bit more for the suspension. I think I'm going to have to trim them some more, but I had to trim them just to get the fender, inner fender in. Brake lines are run, all clamped down. Comes over this side, runs over along the cross member, and then I'm going to connect to the master cylinder and the proportion valve with flex lines. So I'm waiting for a couple more connectors to finalize these fittings here. This is the one for the front. Once I get those pieces in, I'll be able to finish that up. And I've been looking at the heater core, tubing. This is a stock GT tube here, but I don't know. I mean, I don't see where it would hook up and bolt to anything. Maybe it bolted to the inner fender or the Mustang. So I'm going to have to modify that so we can bolt to something on the motor. and then it's like pretty tight, but there is room. But I don't know how you would ever get to it if you had to replace it with the body on. But it's a little tight. So, like I said before, I got all the fueling lines done. Battery cables are run. So I'm working on some more plumbing here and trying to get that all roughed in. So it's coming out pretty good. Had to modify the inner tunnel a little bit to make room for the fitting coming out of the evaporator and for the service valve. It's a lot easier to access up here versus if I put it on the elbow down here by the engine. So there really was no room for that. But I can smooth that out a little bit and it'll look like it's factory when I'm done. The hoses are all laid out now, so I can crimp them and they're ready to be installed permanent. But I really want to get them roughed in. I'll put a clamp up here, hold this one. So it's pretty clean, not too bad. So I think it's coming along pretty good. I put tape on all the fittings to the hoses so I don't lose the orientation of the hoses and so they don't end up being twisted the wrong way. And then I'll just pull the tape off before I crimp them. So I have a crimping tool. I've never used it, but I'll give it a try. So here's the crimping tool. I'm not sure which fittings to use. I'll have to figure that out. And, I mean, instructions are pretty simple. You put the jaws and the tool in the jaw, hydraulic pump, and it crimps the fitting. When you put the hose in, there's even a little hole to make sure the hose is all the way in, so that's good. And I'll pull the tape off before I actually crimp it, and it should be good. Okay, it was a little confusing at first, but it's because some of the dies are for regular hose like this. Some of the dies are for reduced barrier, which means it has a thinner wall but the same size inside diameter. So once you figure that out, basically you've got your liquid line, your hot gas line, and your suction line. It's 5/16, ½ inch, and 5/8 inner diameter of the hose. So that's cool. I think I got that figured out. And so now I can just start crimping. That was the liquid line. This is the hot gas line that goes to the condenser. It's a little bit bigger. Switch out the die. bad. Not bad. Not bad at all. Okay, get the hoses all crimped, laid out, and they're fitted pretty good. I mean, it's not hitting anything. It's as much clearance as it possibly could get. I'm going to tie this one up, clamp it somewhere, but the rest are in, you know, I can get the service valve on here, service valve on there. So, you know, it seems complicated, but it's really not that bad. There's three different lines, and then you got a liquid line accumulator here to put in it, and then you got your 3 tertiary switch here for high pressure and low pressure, and that'll help turn the fan on. It gives a signal switch when you get the high pressure builds, and it'll turn the fan on. So, I mean, the AC system's plumbed. I mean, that's pretty much it for the refrigerant lines. So, keep moving on. Got the brake lines terminated with the flex lines. I was waiting for a couple of fittings. I'm not real thrilled about using these frame fittings, but I can't find just an inline adapter from AN to inverted flare. So, I mean, they work and there's nothing wrong with them, but it just kind of looks a little goofy because there's no frame tab holding it on. Don't really need it. I mean, there's a clamp right there. But it's a lot easier hooking up with flex instead of hardline because, you know, if they're not perfectly lined up, you can get cross-threaded, and it's really, especially tight spot like that. And they needed to have it real tight here because it's close to the engine, so they really didn't have room for a hard line to make a turn. So that worked out a lot better. But and then it's got plenty of clearance for. I had to make sure there's room for the steering column to go through, and then the inner fender comes down and misses all the lines there. So that's pretty much all the flares and all the lines are run, and you know, just loosely mocked up. So on to the next. All right, it's park. That's reverse, neutral, drive, second first, I guess. So that's definitely park, because it pulled the paw in to lock it up. So, and that's park, and that's reverse. And that's neutral. Okay. Since we're using a early Mustang rack, it takes a couple of special adapters to fit into the power steering connection. So they're expensive, but it's the only way you can adapt to a Dash 6 fitting. They're two different sizes, so they're kind of custom made special. But then I can use Dash 6 on the for the hoses to come up to the power steering. So one of the best tools I got is a hydraulic flaring tool, and it was pretty expensive, but you can do 45 and 37 degree AN fittings. It's a pretty handy. It makes doing stainless steel and larger size tubes pretty easy to do. So with a tube nut and a sleeve for AN, you don't need to double flare it. A single flare is all you need. It might be a little too big. Alright, but it came out clean, but it's a little too big, so I'm going to have to maybe file down the edge a little bit so it gets a little smaller, but that'll work out just right. So anytime I'm working with stainless, you also really have to put anti-seize on it, because the stainless steel on stainless will gall and it'll lock up. You'll never get it apart. You might as well throw the piece away. So not a lot, don't want to get it on the flare, but just a little bit. And there we go. Now I can run hose from my power steering pump using the PTFE lines and right to the steering rack. Okay, I got the emergency brake cable all cut and connected. It still has plenty of adjustment left. One of the little tricks I do is just cut the end of the cable and weld the ball on it, and that'll keep it from, instead of using some kind of clevis or clamp. And then I also got the transmission cable routed and connected. Kind of loops around up on the body and then goes back up to the shifter. It's a little tight, but it moves pretty good. You got everything secured to the floor with clamps, so no rattles. So it's moving along pretty well. So I'm going to install some proper length bolts. These are just temporary on the transmission. So to do that, I like to chase the threads. I take an old bolt and just cut some slots in it. I like doing that rather than using an actual tap, because I don't want to take any metal off. I just want to clean the threads, and that usually works pretty good. So I'll run this down through all the holes and replace all these bolts, because you gotta remember they're pretty long. They gotta go into the block pretty far, and a couple of them are extra long because they have dowel pins, so the threads are way down inside the engine block, so they need to be extra long. So I'll clean these up with the thread chaser and then put the new bolts in. So tonight I got the gas tank installed. Still waiting on a couple pieces, but I didn't want to keep waiting and not have it put in. I'm going to need a couple little longer bolts. I got to get the fuel sending unit yet. The fuel lines are going to drape over the top, and then the vent I'm going to put on the other side because the battery is going to be up in the trunk here, so I figure I better put the fuel vent on the other side, and then it'll be easy to connect the hoses once the body comes down. You can see there's an access port that it's going to have a cover on it in case you really had to get to the fuel pump. You could take it out. I mean, it wouldn't be fun, but it's instead of dropping the tank, you can pull it out the trunk. So to make room for the hoses and fittings on top of the tank, there's some tubing up in there that's welded onto the body as a spacer, so there's room for the hoses and the fittings on top of the tank. So the tank is actually like 1.25 inches lower than factory, so we had to make special straps from scratch. The owner did that, so I think it's in pretty good shape. Along with the gas tank, I've been working on the steering column. We're still kind of missing some pieces here. That's the wrong one. Got a new switch. I'd already put that in. Column's assembled, but I still got to figure out the universal joint and bearing on the end there. It's going to have an aftermarket steering wheel and horn, so I got to get that to work with all this. So getting there slowly, but lots of work to do.